All right. Well, welcome back, everybody tuning online to another exciting week of GPS Live. Um, we're switching up a little bit this week. Tristan is out and about, but that doesn't mean that we can't have great content for our viewers. With me, I have Lantre. So real quickly, hey, everybody. My name is Jonathan Singer, and I've got.
Trace Olifield, nice to meet you, everybody.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Trace. This week we are doing GPS Live for the week of June 17th. That is today's date. Yeah, today's date of 2022 for those that are watching on the recap. And as usual, we always have to have an exciting announcement around the views and opinions expressed by the hosts and of this live stream are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security. Well, now that we've got that out of the way, Trace, how are you doing this week? How are things going?
Doing fantastic, buddy. Hope everything's been going good for you. It's been a super busy week helping people, doing some research, doing some training, keeping up on events of what's happening in the world so we can give our customers the best guidance possible in these situations.
That's fantastic, right? I love it. There's been like you said, all kinds of great things going on this week. For any of those that are tuning in online, if you're ever interested in participating in some of our local community events, please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we can get you directed to the right people. Now, besides all of the fun stuff, of course, there's always something interesting in the security world, right? To talk about, and that will kind of kick us off, right? Are you ready to kind of roll right into our first story of the week?
You bet. I can't wait to get into these stories.
Awesome.
I do believe the first one we're going to be talking about, one of my favorite topics, is vulnerabilities.
Oh, let's bring it on in. All right. So hardware flaws in processors. And this came at us from a couple different directions, right? Where do you think we should start? Should we start with the Apple side of the house?
Let's start with Apple. A is for Apple, right? And everybody
A for Apple.
So we'll start there.
So what we're seeing here is coming to us from an article by TechCrunch. It's been reported that Apple M1 chips, right, the current line of chips. Now we know the M2s are coming out soon, but it's this unpatchable hardware flaw. Trace, what have we seen? What are we learning about this?
So well, I've got to say I'm a video gamer at heart, right? So when they call this the attack, the Pac-Man, right? It's a pointer authentication code, which is going against the actual chipset for the exploitation. I get a little bit of a smile out of that. But
of course,
the reality is, these hardware ones are very hard to detect early in the cycle of development, right? As well as once they get in the wild, like how do they get exploited? And I think this one's a little bit different, though, from what I've been reading. How about you?
Yeah. And so what we're reading here, right? And yeah, we're starting to see this age, right, of side channel attacks and these concepts of how do you go after hardware and microchips and make them, I guess we'll call it glitch in a sense, and do things they're not necessarily originally designed to. This particular one, at least with the M1 base, ARM architecture, it goes after something called a pointer authentication code. And I think that's where the Pac in Pac-Man is
Exactly.
because we have to name everything these days. Exactly. Yeah. And so, but according to the article, right, we're kind of getting into the technical side, and by no means am I a hardware expert in the design of microchips, but it has to do with leaking these code results, right? And this information can be used maliciously because it contains a cryptographic signature, right?
Correct. So this is kind of where you're getting into corrupt the memory. So it has to fall back to a mechanism that says, here's what you do in this situation, right? And then this is that modification of that path. So you sidestep the security features built into the way things get processed.
Right? And they're still talking about where it's not a magic bypass, right? That's a quote coming from the Apple team and the researchers in a sense. But M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max, right? The whole line is affected by this, according to these MIT researchers. And even somehow chip manufacturers like Qualcomm and Samsung also kind of got slipped into here. I guess it has to do a lot with the similar architecture.
I froze.
Oh, that's okay if you froze.
Yeah, I froze just a second. Okay, I'm back.
You're surprised. Well, hey, that's what happens when we do these kinds of things live.
That's it, man.
But yeah, it's not a magic bypass by any means, and they're also saying that it can only take an existing bug that the pointer authentication protects against. And the fact of the matter is, this is definitely something interesting, and that let's kind of spin it in the other direction, right? We just mentioned Apple's not the only one dealing with unpatchable hardware right now, right?
That's correct. Intel is also saying its own attack, and AMD as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
The good news is, from the gamer's perspective, GPUs they're not affected. Nvidia, you don't have to sweat this one out just yet. But this, from my understanding, is when we're getting to a power analysis attack. That's the name of this particular attack.
Got it.
It's going to exploit that component.
And so, to kind of revisit some memory lane with some of the other types of hardware attacks, right? Historically, like these side channels, right? That means is coming in from maybe a different direction to attack something unconventionally, right? Historically, maybe one of them was to change the voltage from at a certain point in time on a chip and see if it reacts differently or accidentally jumps a step, right? We've seen these things in all kinds of research. And this one, we had some stuff there. They're calling it Hertz bleed, and I guess Hertz coming from what we all frequency, right? Exactly, right. And so I guess this is not necessarily like a voltage attack. They're taking that concept of power attack, but they're applying it to other things that you can control, the frequency of our processors.
Right, and at the end of the day, right, what is going on in general is people are trying to break the normal process and then look for an opening they can go in and modify things as needed. Almost every single attack, it's how do things normally work and how do I break that? And this is just another way of doing that same methodology, but at that hardware level. Right?
Yeah, and so ARS Technica is the one we're focusing on for the Intel and AMD side of this, weekly article, and they're talking about being able to do something even as far as extract an encryption key from a server running a piece of software called Sike, S-I-K-E. And now many people may have not heard of that. There's entire industries outside of what you and I do that's very, very established and very, complex. But the fact of the matter is, like the M1 stuff, this is an untraditional attack against the hardware that involves cryptographic keys, cryptographic information, things that are meant to be, we'll call privileged, right? And so it's definitely something that's that is going to be on the horizon. All parties are issuing CVEs for it, and as we mentioned, it just.
Well, I was going to say there's a good piece to note here, right? It's the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th generation microarchitecture that Intel has introduced. So this isn't just a today thing. We're going to go back a gen or two, right? And so this is where it's like you better make sure this one gets patched because we got a lot of these, I'd say, different generations in the wild, right? So it gives them a big surface to go after, attack surface.
Exactly. And it may seem a little bit out of the reach of maybe our modern cybersecurity, but there are definitely parties, right? Government level and other high areas of interest that could potentially be targeted for this kinds of stuff. And so talking about a big scale, right, of how many systems are out there, right? All these generations of processors. That's a perfect segue to bring us in. You want to introduce our next topic here?
Oh, one of my absolute favorites of all times is DDoS attacks because of my history with them, right? So
wait a minute. Let's just clear that up.
Being the victim of and learning how to deflect, not launch. That's a whole different story, right? So just on the defense side, right?
Yeah.
So this story that we're coming up on now, it's Cloudflare saw the record-breaking DDoS attack at 26 million requests per second. So for those who are unfamiliar with DDoS, it's just a volumetric attack. I'm going to send as much garbage at you as possible to disrupt the service at that particular point, like a web portal. I'm going to go to Amazon and buy something. Boom, I can't get in, right? I'm going to go to my bank and I'm going to go do my normal activity. Well, I can't get in because there's no way to authenticate, right?
Yeah.
I will say that, my history in this space being from a telecommunications provider, a large cable company, we saw that the number one attack targets were gamers, kids playing against each other, and then someone would launch an attack to destabilized their connection right there. Ping times went through the roof. They couldn't respond. They get the winning edge, and away they go.
It's like they lag them out essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, the number 2 target, the one that we saw that was more on the business front, was schools. Online test sites, they would be attacked, right? Because the kids can buy these DDoS attacks, $10, 10 minutes, boom, I don't have to go take that test now.
So you're saying like around like exam season at the end of the semester, suddenly nobody could take their exam online because
And down here in Florida, there's a particular large school organization we worked with almost 10 years ago now, but they had all of their sites located into 250 schools, right? So when that attack hit, 250 schools could not take their test.
Oh, see, right? That's crazy.
So now you're talking about on Saturday, let's go in and let's go take our test, right? Can you imagine?
I don't want to do that.
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't either.
And so the article we're focusing on is coming from the Hacker News, and they're talking about this botnet of over 5,000 devices, and each of those individual devices was in turn generating 5,200 requests per second at the peak, right? And so do a little math there: 5 times 5, 25 million requests sounds about right. It's just crazy. And so this was the current record setting DDoS scale at 26 million requests per second. The previous record was just set a couple months ago, back in April, at 15.3 million. And another one of our favorite industries, it was targeted at a crypto company. Of course, how does crypto always get mixed into this?
No idea.
Yeah. And so I bet, at the ISP days, you saw not just traffic you mentioned amongst your users, but coming in and out of your network too, right?
Well, exactly, because the bot network, you have really no idea where they're coming from, right? So we would see different bot networks that would be 50, 100, 150 that would be infected, and that they would farm it out across the multiple networks to launch an attack together. Right?
Got it.
And now you're seeing these bot networks getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because over time they're just adding another slave into the mix.
Yeah. And what's interesting, and it's funny you mentioned that, because that was, a generation a bit ago of how DDoS is operated then. Nowadays, they specifically mentioned in the article that it was from cloud service providers as opposed to the classic residential internet service provider.
Exactly,
users.
Because you got all the VMs being spun up, right?
Yeah.
You got containers spun up because they're just performing a function. Hey, I want you to do the following thing. Go. Going back to your crypto miners. I mean, people are using that to mine nowadays, not just at home. So
once they get into your AWS or your Azure or your GCP, if they can get a key from somewhere, then all of a sudden, boom, all these instances are up and running, and they're all doing nefarious things.
Exactly. Hey, they're going to leverage your assets against you, right? I mean, they don't have to pay for the infrastructure that y'all need.
No, exactly. So they're going to use against you, and then they're going to do whatever they need to do. And it's absolutely awful. But that's really cool that we're able to identify these attacks, and we're able to stop things of such crazy scale. One of the other things I thought was really interesting is that we're now measuring volumetric DDoS attacks over 100 gigabits per second, right?
Yep.
I can't even imagine what that kind of pipeline, that kind of bandwidth throughput we're seeing, and now they're just saying, that's just where we're starting to measure now. It's getting that bad.
Yeah, and I can tell you these little low attacks, like the 100 meg, 200 meg, a gig, those don't even get tracked half the time, right? Because they're so low, but the impact to services are still felt pretty good, right?
Of course.
And one thing I'll throw in there too about the attack itself. Normally it's about disrupting, but there are a lot of times it's used as a distraction. Yeah.
And the distraction, yes, potentially. And another one too is we're starting to see ransomware, not with necessarily deploying a malicious piece of software, but also I'll keep your website offline unless you pay me.
Yes.
Right.
I got a big hammer and I'm using it on you. Pay me to make it up.
Stop hitting yourself. And that's the thing too, right? And so you're absolutely right. These DDoS attacks could come for a number of reasons, right? And just in the sense of denying services is only one small factor, right? And the ransom stuff is on the rise, and like you said, all the other encompassing things in between. It's interesting, right? When I was doing the data center stuff back in the day, we used to defend DDoSes with hardware, right?
Oh,
Imagine a piece of hardware that would focus on all these, I don't know, UDP reflection, right? When NTP
I was going to say,
part of the game.
I've also administered those products as well. I can tell you, it's like, hey, of the 25 different attacks, which one was this for, right? And one of my favorite ones to see was time-based attacks. Hey, can you tell me what time it is?
Yeah,
and
the NTP servers.
That's it. There was zero authentication needed. I could just say, hey, tell Jonathan what time it is.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, we'll redirect you to tell somebody else that never really asked in the first place.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, no, we'll see as this continues to grow and new records continue to be set. And that's definitely a challenging thing. And in fact, unlike the first story where there wasn't really a patch to go on with these new record setting things, something funny you and I were talking about earlier is this is a great segue into our next story of the day. Right. And so this one focuses around Microsoft patches, right? Our favorite, I don't know, I'd say it's my 7th favorite holiday is Patch Tuesday on the scale of things. But there's a big one. And we don't normally, talk about Patch Tuesday on this show, but this is very focused on something critical that's it's very high risk and it is in the wild, right? And so Trace, what are we seeing about this one?
So first of all, there's a couple of things I'll highlight. Now, first, the CVE is number 30,190 of the year, right? So
it's only June.
It's only June, right? And 30,000. So the vulnerability volume is just increasing year over year over year, right? And it's 0 days aren't the real problem. It's, hey, we found it yesterday or a month ago. It's who knows how to exploit it, right? So what we're seeing with the bad guys is they're able to exploit in Microsoft Windows the support diagnostic tool, or MSDT. So it's going to have a remote code execution bug that affects all Windows versions still receiving security updates.
Right. And again, for those out there, XP is long gone. Okay. So stop using it.
I talked to a couple customers last week.
Oh, right.
They're still out there.
And so what's interesting is that according to Microsoft, right, there is some workarounds, but they strongly recommend that you get these patches installed. And the reason that I really wanted to talk about this article is because it's not just a code execution, which is bad in itself to begin with, but it can be triggered by something as simple as viewing and previewing a Word doc, right? And that's the level that of these attacks that are happening right now, and that immediately escalates into this bigger thing. So in the wild, we're seeing malicious attachments, and we're seeing or links to download particular types of documents that could then trigger this MSDT tool within Microsoft Windows. But yeah, beyond that, 30,000. I remember. Do you remember that day? Should we maybe add a fifth digit?
Yeah, like, nah, it's not going to be needed.
To the CVEs,
Oh, yes.
It seems like a lot going on here. But
now, one thing, too, I'll highlight that I think is important for people to know, because, we're sitting here talking about challenges and risks that exist in the environment, but, what can people do about it, right? And from an operations background, I know that even if a patch was released magically, like right now, right, I still have to go through testing and validation and the deployment phase and going through a change control board. So there's a lot of time it takes to go from discovering to risk elimination or reduction, right? So the cool part is that there are some new techniques that are available today, like virtual patching, that allow security teams and operations team that little extra buffer of time. So 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it wasn't a thing, but it is a thing now, like a technique and a tool that people might want to explore to see if it'll help them out.
I'd hate to be on the other end. You're right. Like, right, you can't just roll something out. But this is one of those rare cases, right? Microsoft's own security response center specifically is quoted saying Microsoft recommends installing the update as soon as possible. It's definitely serious. So if you have maybe like a queue of updates or a prioritization or a QA testing policy,
Move this up.
this needs to be to the top of that list. And this goes to everybody out there tuning in online live. I know we're watching this in the magic future and realizing maybe this bug is still around.
It will be
something to absolutely, look at and take seriously within your organization. Trace, how like, what are your thoughts around like how to help escalate these kinds of things, especially in some large enterprises that have a very stringent rollout, procedure?
So this is where number one is communication. You got to get it knocked out through your organization, top down. This is what's important and why it's important and what the risk is. And it's not like, I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of security folks get the chicken little mindset. You're just using FUD to scare me into doing something. But like this one in particular, look how easy it is. Yeah. And bad actors in the world are already leveraging it. So it's a higher risk or a higher chance that this thing actually happens to you. Right. Number one. So you educate that piece. Number two, prioritization in your patch queue. What can we do to get this out the door sooner? Now that we all agree it's a problem, what do we do to escalate through processes? Right. And then number three, like I mentioned earlier, virtual patching. What can I do to buy myself more time until that patch gets out there? So kind of those 3 steps to get you through the process sooner rather than later.
Got it. No, and that's great advice, for the people and the folks, tuning in online, because that's going to be useful. There are probably, some individuals right now that are concerned and they're worried about how they're going to tackle and address some of this stuff, right? Do you have a methodology in place to roll these kinds of things out effectively and within a reasonable amount of time? And it's going to be an interesting one. So just to kind of, recap a little bit about where we started our week at, you and I have had, great weeks out in the real world, but here down in cyberspace, we've kind of hit some unpatchable things on the terrifying end with all major consumer hardware processors.
Yeah, exactly.
Which then led us to kind of, and again, to reiterate, the hardware articles we read were coming from TechCrunch and ARS Technica, which leads us to the record setting. And I don't know, this is like one of those things of like, I'd love to set a record for like a land speed record, or I'd like to set the record, of the most Legos in a building or something, but I don't want to set like the record for the largest DDoS, but we're currently setting those as we speak, in time. And then finally, something we at least can patch, right? There is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel with the Patch Tuesday this week. There was a name, right? Everything has a name. We saw Hertz bleed with the hardware. Wasn't there a name with with this advisory?
Let's see. Let me double check.
Folina.
For Microsoft, correct.
Yeah, and so
Folina.
We'll continue to be entertained by the names coming from the security industry. Outside of that, we've had some people jumping in and watching live, and we definitely appreciate everybody who gets a chance to join us every week at 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific on Fridays. And really with that, please be sure to check out some additional reading in the links below. Really, this has been awesome. Tristan, we miss you if you're tuning in online and can hear us. But welcome, Trace, to the fun this week, and we'd love to have you back in the future.
Well, thanks for having me. It has been a blast. I enjoy these conversations. Feel free to invite me anytime.
Perfect. Well, with that, this has been GPS Live for the week of June 17th, 2022, as mentioned before. And I am, and always will be, Jonathan Singer.
And Trace Hollifield.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Trace. It's been a pleasure. And with that, we'll go ahead and over and out. We'll see y'all later.